The ring came home on a Tuesday in April. Claire burst through the door laughing, holding her left hand high so the diamond caught every light in the hallway. I was at the stove, stirring the same chicken soup I had made the night she learned to walk. I set the spoon down, wiped my hands on the apron she once called cute in a retro way, and opened my arms. She let me hug her for exactly 2 seconds. Then she stepped back and the space between us began. His name was Marcus. Old banking family, new expectations. His mother wore pearls that had never seen dishwater and spoke of the estate on the coast before she ever asked how I took my tea. That evening we sat at the kitchen table where Claire used to color while I paid bills. She spread glossy magazines across the wood-like battle plans. A castle in Scotland. A private island in the Maldives. A vineyard in Napa that rented for $500,000 a weekend. I asked softly, "Have you thought about the little chapel where your father and I were married?" She laughed the way you laugh at a child who has asked for the moon on a string. "Mom, that place is sweet, but this is my forever day. It has to be perfect." I poured tea that went cold. I watched her fingers trace photographs of gowns that cost more than most houses. And I felt the first small fracture appear in the life I had believed would always hold us both. The weeks after were gentle disappearances. Phone calls returned hours later. Texts that ended with heart emojis instead of "I love you." Dinners cancelled because Marcus's mother needs to approve the calligrapher. I told myself it was the whirlwind. Brides forget their mothers for a season. Mothers wait. That is the bargain we make when we first feel them move inside us. One evening in May she came alone. She sat on the edge of the sofa, knees pressed together, the way she used to when she had lost something precious. "Mom," she said, studying her manicure instead of me, "Marcus's family is particular. They feel the wedding should reflect their world." I waited. The grandfather clock ticked the same rhythm it had ticked through every difficult conversation we ever had. She finally looked up. "I think it would be easier if you just let me handle everything. You've done enough." I remember tasting metal in my mouth. I remember smiling the small, harmless smile widow's perfect. "Of course, darling," I said. And the fracture became a canyon I pretended not to see. June arrived warm and careless. The lilacs outside the kitchen window bloomed the same color they had the year Claire was born. I watched them open and close from the same chair where I once rocked her to sleep. The messages began as gentle suggestions. Then they became instructions. "Don't bring Grandma's silver cake server, Mom. The venue provides everything. Don't mention Dad during the toasts. Marcus's family doesn't know how to react to widows. Don't wear anything too bright. The photographer says pastel palette only." Each text landed like a small stone dropped into still water. The ripples reached farther than she knew. In July came the one about color. A group chat with the bridesmaids. I had been added by mistake, then never removed. Claire typed, "Moms, please stick to beige or blush. No black, no navy, definitely no white." Someone added a laughing emoji. Claire added another. I read it at the breakfast table. The phone screen glowed against the scarred wood where she once carved her initials with a butter knife. I set the phone down, walked upstairs, and stood in the hallway outside the attic door for a very long time. August brought the final list, printed on heavy cream cardstock and slipped beneath my front door while I was watering the roses. A single sheet titled Mother of the Bride Guidelines. 12 bullet points. Number 7, please avoid morning colors. Black makes the photos look funereal. Number 11, the mother of the bride dress should not compete with the bridal gown in shade or silhouette. I carried the paper to the kitchen, laid it beside the cold teacup, and stared until the words stopped making sense. Then I folded it once, twice, and placed it in the drawer with the good linen napkins that would never be used at her wedding. That night I sat on the porch long after the streetlights came on. I listened to the crickets and felt the house settle around me like an old friend who already knows the ending. I thought of the white dress hanging in the attic, wrapped in tissue and lavender since 1976. I thought of the way Claire used to twirl in it when she was 7, pretending the hem was a cloud. I did not cry. I simply went inside, locked the door, and climbed the narrow stairs to the attic for the first time in 20 years. The dress was exactly where I had left it. The silk had kept its quiet glow. I touched the lace at the neckline and felt something inside me straighten, the way a plant straightens toward light it has been denied too long. The attic smelled of cedar and old summers. Moonlight came through the small round window and laid a silver coin on the floorboards. I unwrapped the dress slowly, tissue paper whispering like dry leaves. The silk had not yellowed. The seed pearls still caught what little light there was and held it gently, the way I once held Claire's tiny hand crossing the street. I stood there in my nightgown holding 48 years of almost in my arms. Behind the dress box, pushed against the eaves, was the small iron strongbox Robert had carried home the week before he died. I had never opened it. He had pressed the key into my palm with fingers already cold and said only, "When they forget who paid the light bills all these years." I carried the box downstairs. The kitchen clock struck 2. I set the strongbox on the table beneath the same lamp we used for homework and income tax and every hard truth we ever faced together. Inside were 2 documents. The first was the will everyone knew about, the house to Claire, the investments split evenly, my name mentioned only as beloved wife with a modest monthly allowance. The second will was dated 6 months later, written in Robert's careful hand the night his heart began to fail. It revoked everything. It placed every asset, every share, every offshore account into a trust bearing only my name. $7,400,000 resting quietly in places Claire's new family would never think to look. At the bottom, in Robert's ink that had not faded, "If our daughter ever treats you as decoration instead of foundation, burn the first will and wear the white dress. She will understand then." I read until the words stopped swimming. Then I read again, tracing each clause with a finger that did not tremble. When dawn came pale through the curtains I folded both wills, placed the false one back in the strongbox, and carried the true one to the safe behind the portrait of Claire at 6 years old. I hung the white dress on the back of my bedroom door so the morning light could find it. The silk caught the sun and threw it back like quiet laughter. I stood there a long time, barefoot on the rug we bought in Marrakesh, and felt the house breathe with me for the first time in months. That afternoon I phoned the tailor who had made my wedding gown in 1976. She was 83 now, hands steady as ever. She did not ask why. She simply said, "Bring it Tuesday, Mrs. Ellis. We'll make it fit the woman you are today." I hung up and looked at the dress swaying gently in the draft from the open window. It no longer looked like a relic. It looked like a promise that had waited patiently for me to remember I was still the bride in my own story. September arrived soft and golden. The tailor's shop smelled of starch and rosewater and time held gently in folds. I stood on the little platform while Mrs. Moreau pinned and chalked and murmured numbers in the same voice she had used when I was 27 and terrified the dress would not close. She took it in at the waist, let it out at the shoulders, shortened the hem so it would brush the tops of my shoes instead of drowning me. She replaced the yellowed veil with fresh illusion and added tiny crystals along the neckline that caught light the way Claire's eyes once caught light when she believed her mother could fix anything. Each Tuesday I drove home with the dress laid across the back seat like sleeping royalty. I hung it on the bedroom door and watched it wait. At night I sat at the kitchen table with Robert's ledger and a fresh notebook bound in pale blue leather. I listed every expense Claire had quietly charged to the joint account she believed would be hers one day, the deposit on the vineyard, the couture gown, the string quartet flown in from Vienna, the fireworks that cost more than most people's houses. I wrote the numbers in Robert's fountain pen until the pages looked like quiet thunder. I moved money the way moonlight moves across water, slowly, steadily, unseen. Never enough to raise an alarm, always enough to matter when the final curtain fell. By the end of October the trust held $7,400,000 in places Marcus's family would need a lifetime to find. Claire came once in November. She swept in wearing cashmere and new distance, carrying color swatches and a clipboard. She spread everything across the table without asking. I poured tea she did not drink. She looked up at one point and noticed the dress hanging on the back of the door. Her smile thinned. "Mom, you're not seriously thinking of wearing white, are you? People will think you're trying to upstage me." I stirred my tea once, twice. "I haven't decided," I said. She laughed the way you laugh at a child who has suggested wearing pajamas to church. Then she gathered her papers and left without kissing my cheek. That night I stood before the mirror in the white dress for the first time since 1976. The silk felt clean and sure. The crystals caught the lamplight and held it like small, patient stars. I looked less like a widow and more like the woman Robert had promised forever to. I practiced walking in the heels I had bought to match. I practiced the small, pleasant smile that made bank managers and wedding planners tell me everything. I practiced breathing in a dress that remembered every dream I had ever had before I learned to put them away for someone else. December came cold and bright. The invitations arrived, heavy cream stock, gold lettering, my name in small print at the bottom as mother of the bride. I laid it beside the blue notebook and the brass key that still hung warm against my heart. Some evenings I walked through the house touching things I would not take with me. The piano where Claire learned her first hesitant scales. The window seat worn smooth by years of waiting for her to come home from school. I left every light burning because darkness felt too forgiving. I was ready. Not angry. Simply ready the way snowfall is ready long before the first flake touches the ground. The morning of the wedding began with silence. No birds yet. Only the low hum of the furnace and the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. At 6:14 my phone lit the dark bedroom with one line from Claire, "Don't wear black, Mom. You'll look like a widow and ruin the photos." I read it 3 times. Then I rose, walked to the closet, and took the white dress from its padded hanger for the final time. The silk slid over my skin like cool water returning to its own river. I fastened the tiny crystal buttons Robert had kissed one by one 48 years ago. I pinned the fresh veil low so it would not hide my face. I stood before the mirror and looked at the woman I had almost forgotten existed. Silver hair swept into a low chignon. Pearls at my throat. White silk falling clean to the floor. I did not look like a widow. I looked like the bride I never stopped being. I placed the blue notebook and the second will inside a cream leather clutch that matched the dress perfectly. I slipped Robert's ring, the plain gold band he had placed on my finger in 1976, onto my right hand where it had not been since the day he died. Then I walked downstairs, picked up the small overnight case I had packed weeks earlier, and left the house without locking the door. The car waited at the curb, engine warm, driver silent. I sat in the back seat and watched my street slide away in the pale December light. The roses in the front garden were bare, but I knew they would bloom again long after anyone remembered this day. At the vineyard the air smelled of frost and money. White tents glowed against the hills. Guests in fur and velvet drifted across the gravel like expensive birds. I stepped out of the car and every head turned for half a heartbeat before deciding I must be someone important they simply hadn't met yet. Claire's planner appeared at my elbow, face tightening when she saw the dress. "Mrs. Ellis." Claire asked that mothers wear muted tones. I smiled the small, pleasant smile I had perfected. Claire asked many things, I said, and walked past her toward the great wooden doors of the barrel room where the ceremony would be held. Inside, 300 chairs faced an arch of white roses and baby's breath. The string quartet was tuning. Candles flickered in glass hurricanes tall enough to hide a multitude of sins. I took my place at the very front of the aisle, where no seat had been reserved for me. I stood calmly in my white silk while guests filed in and did double takes they tried to hide behind programs. Whispers rose and fell like expensive waves. Marcus's mother arrived in champagne beige and froze when she saw me. Claire's future mother-in-law opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I simply inclined my head the way queens do when protocol has already been rewritten. The quartet began the processional. Every head turned to the doors. And in that moment, before Claire appeared, I opened the cream clutch, removed the second will, and laid it on the small table beside the unity candle where everyone would see it once the vows were spoken. The doors opened. Claire stepped into the light wearing $20,000 of French lace and a smile that faltered the instant she saw me standing in pure, unbroken white at the front of her perfect day. She walked the aisle anyway. Because what else could she do? The dress I wore had already done the speaking. Claire reached the arch. The officiant smiled the practiced smile of a man who had never seen a mother of the bride in pure white before. Marcus turned, looked at me, and the color left his face the way water leaves a glass tipped too far. The quartet ended on a perfect, suspended note. 300 people held one breath. I did not move. I simply stood in the aisle in my 48-year-old silk, the veil brushing my shoulders like quiet memory, and let them look. Claire's lips parted. No sound came. The officiant cleared his throat softly. "Dearly beloved," he began. I lifted one gloved hand, just enough. He stopped. I took one slow step forward so the candles lit the crystals along my neckline and scattered small fires across the vaulted ceiling. Then I spoke. Not loudly. Mothers never need volume when the room has already gone perfectly still. Before these vows are spoken, there is a document on the table that should be read. The officiant glanced at the cream leather folder I had placed beside the unity candle. He opened it with the same reverence he might open scripture. His eyes moved down the page once, twice. When he looked up again, the smile was gone. He began to read. He read the date of the second will. He read the revocation of every gift Claire had counted as already hers. He read the exact balance of the trust, $7,412,000 as of sunrise that morning. He read the clause Robert had written in ink that still looked wet, upon any public instruction that Margaret Ellis dress beneath her station, all assets revert solely to her discretion. He read the final line slowly, so no one would miss it. Today, Margaret Ellis has chosen to appear in the gown she wore when these promises were first made to her. Let the record show the promise has been kept. The vineyard had never been so quiet. Even the candles seemed afraid to flicker. Claire's bouquet slipped from her fingers and struck the wooden floor with a soft, expensive thud. White petals scattered like surrender. I took another step. The silk whispered the only sound in the room. "Claire," I said, gently enough that only the front rows heard, yet loud enough that the back rows leaned forward to catch it, "you asked me not to look like a widow. So I chose to look like the bride I still am." I reached the table, lifted the second will, and held it so the morning light fell across Robert's signature. Then I placed it back down, turned, and walked the length of the aisle again. No one stopped me. No one dared breathe too loudly. At the great wooden doors I paused, looked once over my shoulder at my daughter standing small and stunned in $20,000 of someone else's dream, and spoke the last words she would hear from me that day. The dress was always mine to wear again. The money never was yours to spend. I stepped into the winter sunlight. The doors closed behind me with the soft finality of a book no one will reopen. They say the ceremony continued 20 minutes later in hushed, shaken voices. Claire wore the veil pulled forward so no one could see her face. The fireworks were cancelled. The string quartet played only soft instrumentals. The vineyard staff whispered about the mother in white who had walked out taller than anyone had ever seen her walk in. The money was gone before the cake was cut. Transferred quietly to the children's hospital that kept Claire alive when she was 9, and to the scholarship that still carries Robert's name. She came to the house 3 weeks later. Snow was falling thick and silent. She stood on the porch in the same coat she wore at 15 and asked if the dress was still hanging in the closet. I made tea. We sat at the kitchen table where everything had once been possible. She cried without sound. I passed tissues the way I once passed her crayons. When the cup was empty she whispered, I only wanted it to be perfect. I looked at her for a long, steady moment. Perfection, I said, is wearing what is yours to wear, not what someone else allows. She left without the coat. I hung it beside the white dress that now lives in the light instead of the dark. Some evenings I walk through the garden Robert planted the year Claire was born. The roses sleep under snow, but I know they remember. I sit on the porch with tea that steams only for me and watch the sky turn the same colors it turned the day I said yes in that very dress. People ask if I miss her. I miss the little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms. I do not miss the woman who believed love could be measured in carats and guest lists. The last laugh is never loud. It is the rustle of white silk walking away untouched. It is the soft closing of great wooden doors on a day that belonged to someone else. It is an old woman standing in her own garden wearing the dress she was told never to wear again, knowing every thread still belongs to her. If this story settled gently somewhere inside you tonight, stay a while. The kettle is warm, the chair by the fire is waiting, and there are many more quiet evenings when a woman remembers she was never the background they tried to paint her into. You are safe here. You are seen. And that, my dear, is more than enough.